Okay, everybody, make sure that you have your note sheet with you. We're taking a look at a topic now that's called Immigrants and the Growth of Cities, and ultimately the question that we're going to have you answer today is why did immigrants come to the United States and what impact did they have upon society? The first thing I want to show you is a map that details immigration to the United States from 1820 to 2010. If you take a look, you'll notice that there are some patterns, and as we look from 1870 to 1900, we have a definite increase in the amount of immigrants compared to decades prior to. Many Americans at this point in time feared that newcomers would destroy American culture. However, as we all know, America has become much of what we call a melting pot, and we've come to embrace many cultures, whether it be through traditions, foods, or a variety of other methods. You also notice to the far right, from about 1980 to 2010, the amount of immigrants who have entered the United States over the last 30 years compared to the time period that we're looking at, which is 1870 to 1900, is vastly larger. However, when I show you this next map, which demonstrates the immigrants as a percent of the United States population, roughly from the same point in time, you'll notice that when we're looking at this 1870 to 1900 time period, the percentage of immigrants made up a larger portion of the United States than in the current time that we are living in. The first thing I want to share with you is the reasons that many immigrants came to America. Starting, let's see, on the right side with the Y, is we're taking a look at issues such as religious freedom. In the 1850s, many German and Irish Catholics arrived in the United States, and at the time there was some prejudice against Catholics. However, over time and generations, these immigrants' children began to blend into American society. During this time, we called them, the 1870s, we called them new immigrants. So these are people coming from places outside of Germany and Ireland, primarily those from Southern and Eastern Europe. And they're arriving in very much so increasing numbers. This contrasts with those who were old immigrants, and these were those who were prior to Germans and Irish, and those who were Catholic. The one thing that we also should mention that is not seen on this image is that there was also an influx of Asian immigrants, those who were coming from China and Japan as well, and not settling on the East Coast, but primarily on the West Coast. The main reason many people came was to make money, and then some planned to return home. Others saw this as an opportunity to start fresh. Some of the factors that led to immigration are the same push and pull factors that we had talked about regarding colonization earlier first semester. So some of the push factors that we're going to take a look at here is things that led people from their countries to the United States. These would include issues such as land reforms, or low agricultural prices that pushed farmers from their land. In the 1840s, if we're looking at areas such as China and even Eastern Europe, many countries were involved in political wars, so many people left as refugees seeking out a new place to live. Then there's the pull factors. The United States was pretty attractive due to the fact that there was plentiful land, that there was employment. Issues such as the 1862 Homestead Act made Western farmland very inexpensive. Then there was also those that we also call chain immigrants. These were people who were joining family or friends, those who settled in America, and they were lured here for religious and political freedom as well as economic opportunity. Let's take a look at their experience coming here. So coming to America was an extremely large task. Based upon what you see in this image, people traveled with whatever it is that they could essentially carry, nothing more, nothing less. They needed money for passage, though some could only afford, a ticket one way, even if they intended to come back. Many brought what they could, so clothes, photographs of loved ones that might be left behind, maybe a musical instrument, or tools of the trade if they intended to work upon arriving in the United States. Another issue is finding a port of departure. It's not always said that it was very easy to get here, so it often took going to a different country in order to depart to the United States. Steamships made this trip much safer and faster. However, many immigrants traveled in third class, otherwise known as steerage, which is the worst accommodations on a ship. Generally located on the lower level of the ship, Illness spread quickly, quarters were cramped, theft was often rampant. Upon arrival, which could generally take a couple of weeks, immigrants were processed by officials who decided who could stay in the United States. One would have to be healthy and show that they had money, or at least somebody who would provide for them. I'm sure that you're well aware of probably the most popular place where people arrived, and beginning in 1892, most immigrants from Europe arrived in New York Harbor, specifically at the building that you see here, which is Ellis Island. Typically, if you were a first or second class passenger, you would be inspected on the ship, but those who were in steerage were sent to Ellis Island. Roughly about 2% of immigrants were denied entry into New York City, and this is primarily because ship owners did a screening before they departed whatever country they were leaving. For Asian immigrants who crossed the Pacific and arrived in San Francisco, they were processed in a different area known as Angel Island, and this opened in 1910. Compared to Ellis Island, Angel Island was pretty formidable, officials seeking to filter out Chinese immigrants. Oftentimes it would take them a matter of a week or even more to be processed and let into the American public. After 1882, however, some Chinese travelers were turned away at different locations unless they could prove citizenship, meaning that they had just gone away and returned to the United States for whether it be vacation or see family, or they would only be allowed in if they had an American relative. If we take a look at this map here, I know the key on the bottom left is a little bit small, but we're trying to figure out where did people go. Some of those popular East Coast cities would be New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. The West Coast would be more popular for Asian immigrants, including Hawaii. If you take a look at the areas which are primarily green, blue, and a purplish color, we start to see that those are locations that have a much higher immigrant population. So notice the trends of what we're seeing here. Obviously the South and I guess we could say middle portions of the country have lesser immigrants than those coastal areas. We also have to be aware of what we call birds of passage versus permanent residents. Some people plan to come here and make enough money that they could return home and live fairly comfortably. Other people thought that going home was not an option. They were pushed out of their country, and the United States would be their home for the remainder of their life. In terms of challenges and opportunities, most immigrants stayed in cities, usually because they're close to industrial jobs or factory jobs, and they lived in ethnic neighborhoods with people who share their native language, religion, and culture. And typically, we call these types of places ethnic enclaves. And once more, ethnic neighborhoods where people share their native language, religion, and culture. You know, while this is a map of Manhattan current day, it does show you some ethnic enclaves and how those still exist. If we looked at this well over 100 years ago, you would see that these ethnic enclaves would be much more prominent. A couple of statistics. If you looked at Chicago or San Francisco in 1890, immigrants comprised of 40% of the total population. In New York, 4 out of 5 New Yorkers were foreign-born or had foreign-born parents in that same year of 1890. Many cities had developed places known as Americanization homes or Americanization programs to help newcomers learn ways of America. So they would learn English, they would learn to adopt American dress, diets, and just basic practices. And despite the hopes of many workers, immigrants clung to their traditions. Many who had hoped to return home never did, but they brought their traditions and their practices with them. I'm sure you've heard of the term America being referenced as a melting pot, where white people of all different nationalities blend to create a single culture. And one thing that is often excluded is that Asian immigrants were kind of excluded from this definition, as they were often targets for discrimination. It wasn't easy being an immigrant. There was American-born people known as nativists. Nativists are native-born white Americans who believe that they were superior to the newcomers. So as you see in this image here, a political cartoon of a immigrant coming off of a ship and some men not welcoming them to the country. However, if you look at their shadow, they are represented by immigrants of previous generations. Natives believe that immigrants created competition for jobs that truly belonged to the American born, and religion was an even bigger issue. Natives were primarily Protestants who were suspicious of Catholics, especially those who were from Ireland, Germany, Italy, and those who were Polish. Hostility towards Chinese laborers were even more aggressive, and eventually law came to be in the form of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. What this did is it prohibited immigration by Chinese laborers. It limited their civil liberties, and it forbade them naturalization of anyone who was a Chinese immigrant. Although this was overruled in courts by 1898, it went on largely ignored. This would not be the only time when immigrants would have laws passed to prevent, I guess we could say, assimilation of them into the United States. So why are these restrictions taking place? Well, there's three primary reasons. One is definitely job competition, poverty, and lower wages. Another one that we really haven't talked about quite a lot is bosses and political corruption. Oftentimes, immigrants could be swayed to vote usually towards, Democratic Party in favor of, or in return for jobs or other political favors. And there was also the fear in foreign cultures, language, ideas, and religion, a fear that America would not be America of old. As I mentioned earlier, there were restrictions that had continued beyond the Chinese Exclusion Act, some of which include the Gentlemen's Agreement of 1907, which forbade a good amount of Japanese immigrants. And then there was also the Immigration Act of 1924, which only allowed in 3% of immigrants based upon the 1910 census of how many people lived in that country, and then eventually came to the United States. One quick thing I would like to share with you, and let's move on, is a little bit about the growth of cities and primarily where people went. So what challenges did city dwellers face? How did they meet them? Well, technology is primarily going to improve city life. As we take a look at this picture of Chicago 1871, we start to see that things are going to change from times of old. Americans were experiencing a period of urbanization in which the number of cities were increasing as well as their population. As city sizes swelled, politicians and workers struggled to keep up with the demands of things such as water, sewers, schools, and safety. And new technologies were starting to develop. Skyscrapers, subways. The home insurance building in Chicago, a 10-story building, is in some cases argued to be the first skyscraper. In Boston, 1897, and was the nation's very first subway. Sometimes there would be individuals who can afford transit fares who moved away from the crowded, dirty cities and moved into the suburbs. While this is an image of 1950s suburban America, I think we all understand the idea as we live in one. But at the same time, immigrant newcomers who could not afford mass transit had to work close to factories where they moved into tenements. And tenements were typically low-cost, multifamily housing designed to squeeze as many families in as possible. They were dangerous, and many times people would draw attention to the plight of these dwellers who lived there. Congestion would lead to conditions where unpaved city streets were littered with trash, rats, even dead horses left to rot. Urban plumbing was only in new urban dwellings, and even in tenements, those who were fortunate enough to have shared toilets often overflowed. And because of this, many epidemics were spreading, posing dangers. Open fireplaces, gaslighting started fires that swept through the cities. And the one that I'm sure we're familiar with is the Great Fire of 1871 in Chicago, which killed over 200 to 300 people, though it looks much greater, and it was, but it left over 100,000 people homeless. Beyond this, we see there's dangerous streets, which led to the development of neighborhood gangs, where race, class, and neighborhood loyalties and conflicts would continue to define neighborhood life for many generations. If you've not seen the film Gangs of New York or read the book, what's called The 5 Points, it communicates this issue which took place.